Hello, friends, a very warm welcome. And in the continuing series of taking up very important and crucial themes with respect to Economist, if you go through the whole series, then you will find a very connected and a pertinent idea with respect to taking up of such issues and themes which can help you in creating your own aptitude and attitude towards the CSC examination. Not just that, these discussions are also helpful in creating a mindset which help you in personality test and rest of the lives also. Because everywhere, whether it is business, whether it is corporate, whether it is industry, current affairs and awareness is now mandatory. So India is actually looking forward to enhancing its nuclear capability. So for the first time, it has tested a missile with multiple warheads that can reach different targets at the same time. So this is a very long evolution. India had been a very peaceful country, looking forward to always spreading peace, harmony, and mutual bonhomie among different nations. But then the world may not be thinking the way India thinks. That is why this is an approach which is very important as a deterrent, not to threat someone. So Abdul Kalam Island on Indian territory and Indian territory in the Bay of Bengal, and missile was sent, and you can see further details in our science series where we have discussed about missiles. So this is India's first intercontinental ballistic missile reaching any part of China. But significance is much more because India, when it went on to launch and test independently targeted re-entry vehicle, that is a very, very common term which we use, MIRVs, or which was first developed by America in 1960s. So you can see the kind of priorities that India is carrying. So small warheads, single missile के ऊपर होंगे, capable of striking hundreds of kilometers apart from one another. So it is a kind of a triumph for us. Definitely, we have done it indigenously on our own, and we are definitely greatly proud of it. The dynamics of the whole world is changing. Advantages India is having, that it is having great, great reassurance of itself. Any future kind of threat from China, which is having its own missile defense system, even case of Pakistan also. Secondly, these MRVs will allow India to substitute accuracy for firepower. This is very, very important in today's time. Thermonuclear bomb we tested in 1998. It was not a great success. But then MRVs will allow us to use a larger number of less powerful fission bombs, but they will be delivering our, uh, you know, results much more accurately. They will have same effect as the one large hydrogen bomb. So this is one upside which they have been discussing. So cost saving for an equal number of warheads, targeting. So you can say Indian innovativeness is reflected because this was very much desirable. But in critical terms, MIRVs in one way they are very easy to launch, but then uh, it may be stuffing many warheads into a single missile. That is why they are also attractive targets for an enemy's first strike. Also, if an enemy is going to strike you first, then large number of warheads are aired together. So this is going to be a kind of a disadvantage. So it can also encourage other countries to go for having big arsenals and then to launch them quickly in case of crisis. Arm race in the world was started by US and USSR, UK, France, and China. They are party to it. We are not thinking in the same direction, and India has very little interest, as it is written over here also, in using MRVs for targeting Chinese or Pakistani nuclear missiles. These missiles are not so accurate also. India is going to do many more tests to make it more capability specific. When China is deploying MRVs on some missiles, when Pakistan tested in 2017, when America and Russia are also talking about of reusing them, then in such context we can say that India had did the right thing. India is definitely thinking in the same direction, which is required to be. So that is why we can say that in strategic terms, it's a good step. In terms of vision, is also it is good because India being one of the oldest democratic countries, largest democratic countries, and India being a country which is looking forward to being one of the largest economies, it must have enough strength, enough deterrence, and the capability not only to stand on its own feet, but to show the whole world a way to. That is why it's a correct step in those directions. It is not to threaten someone, it is not to take someone's place, it is to make things more easier and simpler for us.
जी, so we can also
We can
say
move
that
forward.
the threat of
Yeah.
two-front war. So given that thing again, we are building upon
That
to
is
the
already it is there, but then for that it is not the only purpose. We are we are looking forward to creating a kind of an ecosystem. So that I agree, that is there. India's maritime policy, shipping, logistics is a very important but less spoken about area. Very important if you want to transform our economy, want to do something like what China had done to the whole world. Without ports, without containers, without marine shipping infrastructure, we cannot win the whole world in any ways. That is why India in last one decade had been focusing exclusively on creating shipping infrastructure, if I use the word, because we have such a great coastal zones on both sides, eastern and western side, and we have great highways being constructed, we have expressways being constructed, but then aviation, road, rail, everything will be mediocre if India is not going to be a superpower as far as shipping and port is concerned. So that is why the connectivity between all other types of infrastructure is going through ports, because capacity and efficiency are the keywords for the ports. And India, if wants to become a manufacturing and export hub, it is only possible through shipping. That is why, in factual figures, maritime sector accounts for 95% of India's trade by volume and 65% by value. We must always remember this line. 95% by volume and 65% by value. You can think of it. That is why major ports, more than a dozen, their capacity is doubled since last one decade, about 1600 metric tons. Traffic is increasing. We have very strategic locations in Bay of Bengal, in Indian Ocean, Arabian Sea. The turnaround time, that is the time taken by arrival and departure of a cargo ship after unloading and disembarking later on, must cut down. If it is cutting down, then only you can say logistics performance will increase as reflected by logistic performance index. Nhava Sheva in Mumbai, India's commercial capital, the JNPT is handling it after 1990s, high volume container traffic, and then it is India's most efficient public port. Turnaround time is 21 hours at a time when it is handling half of India's container traffic and more than a quarter of customs revenue. So the sea changes the policy, as I just said. We have been discussing that also through our newspaper discussions. Landlord model. Landlord model will be providing common services such as tugboat and pilots, and the cargo operations will be given to private operators. So, like the way you see in Dubai, DP World, or Denmark, or in Netherlands, and so on. Private competitors such as Mundra, we have discussed that also. And then recently, our Prime Minister has inaugurated one more port on the western coast. What's the name? If you can just share.
So
Badhavan, if I'm not wrong.
हाँ जी sir, Mumbai वाद.
So that is also being there. So electronic tolling, and then a kind of a efficient uh, checking system. Logistics cost must also get down, and for that is why Prime Minister had also launched Gati Shakti, so that logistic cost comes to around 5% of the GDP rather than 8%. And modernizing India's custom department, obviously Indian custom and excise services. So they play a very very important role. But India's maritime industry, the kind of money, kind of pump it requires, we have never seen that, but still we are doing the best. We have more than 200 minor and major ports. Country accounted for only 2.4% of the global container traffic in 2021, whereas UAE and Singapore is 4.5%. It is giving. So the question is that they are not manufacturing superpowers, but they are major hubs for transshipment. They are the a kind of a coffee shop in between. India is planning a big hub at Galathea Bay in Nicobar Island. This is factual information, and the location is, one can say, God's gift to India. So that is why we talk about the container ship uh, development in Nicobar. That is what we have been talking about, and environmentalists and NGT and so on and so forth. We have been discussing that also. So India will be becoming a developed country only when our capacity increases, leading shipbuilder we become, and we are able to handle, uh, you know, these kind of export uh, scenarios very well. So our port are not directly on the global shipping routes. That is why we need deeper ports. Then only big vessels can come. Otherwise, they will stuck up. Existing ports like JNPA, they will be getting out of their space to expand. Badavan, as I just said, a man-made island, it will be there, deep enough to accommodate the biggest ships in the world. But building port is the easy part. Connectivity to the interior is a very tough job. Coastal shipping is minimal. Custom processes have reduced the time. That is a plus point for us. But how we link it with the export ecosystem, that is very, very important. Politician, that means political culture, administrative efficiency, and the top of it, the private sector. When all they are coming together, then only it will happen. Otherwise, it is going to take a lot of time. दिव्या, आप क्या कहना चाहते हैं?
सर, जब कोस्टल लाइन की बात करते हैं तो वो इंडिया के 9 स्टेट्स के साथ उनकी इकोनॉमी को और बूस्ट करने के लिए, या फिर जब सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप्स की या अदर स्किल इम्प्रूवमेंट की बात करते हैं तो उनमें भी इम्पोर्टेंट रोल रखते हैं। इम्पोर्ट अगर एक्सपोर्ट बढ़ेगा तो उसके लिए भी तो इम्पोर्टेंट होगा कि कनेक्टिविटी को किस तरह बढ़ाया जाए। उसके अलावा जैसे हम जब वेस्ट एशिया की बात करते हैं तो वहां पर दुबई या फिर जो स्पेसिफिक पोर्ट है उनको यूज किया जाता है इंटरनेशनली। उसी तरह से इंडिया के पोर्ट्स को भी डेवलप किया जा सकता है एक रेस्ट स्पेस की तरह, ताकि और कनेक्टिविटी को बढ़ाया जा सके और उनको और ज्यादा कनेक्ट किया जा सके।
Okay. Can you hear me now?
जी sir.
जी सर।
Now, the semiconductor choke point. We have discussed this previously also. And the
Sir, not audible.
सर आप म्यूट हो, अनम्यूट कर।
Sir, sir, you're on mute.
Can we move forward, Mansi?
जी sir.
Yeah. Taiwan and its semiconductor industry are one of the biggest choke points in the world economy. That is one of the key issues. Why? Because everything is dependent on them. Whether it is phone, whether it is artificial intelligence, everything they are excelling at. But then there is a issue of Taiwan being threatened, Taiwan being asked, Taiwan being bullied by China. It is a very integral element of China-US relationship. So Sino-American war, whether it is trade war, whether it is technology war, whether it is South China Sea, without thinking about Taiwan, it cannot happen. So the chip fabrication plants could be destroyed, output can be embargoed, huge knock on effect. Key word is knock on effect. That is why China, Japan, America, they have been subsidizing the production of chips elsewhere. The only reason why we want to create alternative channels. Diversification makes sense for everyone, obviously, not for Taiwan. So Island is looking forward to economic consolidation, but it is an economic threat to it also, security also. Because once more industries emerge, Taiwan will become poorer. It will become strategically less important also. That means West will be less taking care of it, and there will be more threat to it, and it will be easier for China to do so also without risking its own supply. So Taiwan wants to remain an indispensable part of the whole ecosystem, but the world wants to remain independent as far as semiconductor is concerned, and Taiwan would definitely not appreciate it. First priority is having semiconductor industry in its own background. Second priority is Taiwan, and the third priority is Taiwan. That's how you can understand the whole logic. So Silicon Island, that's what it is called. That's what we can say. And Taiwanese industry is looking forward to understanding and giving all of us also the idea that how it is a sacred mountain, how it is such strategically embedded in Taiwan's soul that 90% of the most advanced semiconductors or the 3 nanometer process, they are from TSMC, that is by China. Most important firm, accounting for 13% of its GDP and 40% of export. But under the 2022 CHIPS Act, US subsidized, we discussed separately also. And that is how semiconductor industry started expanding. Germany, India, Japan, they also have gone for subsidy schemes. Japanese, we have already discussed. America and Japan, they are trying. And obviously, India are also in the race. So, centrality of China will decline. Share of chip vapors less than 10 nanometers, it will be falling from 90% to 70%, and further by margin of about 50% in next 10 years. America's share will be rising from 0 to 30% in next one decade. We have to see what India can do in this scenario. Technological frontier is moving. Foreign fabs may be quickly falling behind, and that is how Taiwanese fabs, they can only be in the picture if they are continuing to advance themselves. For example, 1.4 nanometer chip. So it is not that suddenly things will be changed, but then the relative cost, technological advancement for that, American fabs will be far behind. And in this context, we can think of India also. That is why what Taiwan can do, Taiwan can continue pushing the firms further so that there is a huge gap between them and the rest of the world. The rest of the world is forced to look at Taiwan and still be dependent on it. Example is given of NVIDIA, American semiconductor firm, 88% share for GPUs. It is relying on TSMC to make and package most of the chips in complex process. Multiple chips at the top of a wafer. Taiwan is also assembling 90% of the servers that goes into chips. Servers are also with the Taiwan. So Taiwan is the bedrock of AI industrial revolution. That's what we can say, and we can take the lesson here for India also. When we talk about India's AI mission, then what India can do. So Taiwan wants to help rest of the world to be smarter and to be at the top, and that is what the strategy they will be taking. That is why Taiwan is also giving concessions 25% tax reduction for R&D for cutting edge chips and 5% reduction for purchase. Expanding hardware beyond, you know, and that is why chip designs comes into picture. So market share is rising in designing. So subsidy, future orientation towards technology, these all things one can say that will make or continue to remain Taiwan as the center of strategic revolution as far as chip war is concerned. Western world also wants to decouple. That means dependence linked with China and rest of the world. That is why there are tax sanctions, there are export controls, but still we can say it's a long way to go. Geostrategic conditions are very, very dynamic in nature. TSMC is profitable, and one can say if you are going to push China further in one way, then China may deter itself in crossing the island strait. If Taiwan becomes less important, then also situation is different. If you are forcing China to remain on its feet for long, then it will become more confident also. That is also one scenario. So talk of diversification, talk of semiconductor industries in the rest of the world, Western technology industry remains central to the Taiwanese industry. So the risk, growth, geostrategic relations, everything is linked with the idea that what we are saying. This is the gray zone warfare tactics, where you will put an embargo, you will stockpile things, and so on and so forth. That is why in contingency times, we can say, as example is given here, that if an invasion is done by China, then many chip making machines which are supplied by a Dutch firm can be remotely disabled. So Taiwanese chip empire is integrally linked with the rest of the world. India must think what we must do. And when war is there, as rightly said, it is not the chips, it's the people which are important. But irony is, we are here talking about chips, chips, and chips. But if I say, then there must be people who can eat chips. You are only talking about chips, but not the people. So, Mansi, you can summarize.
So I would say then that chips are being made by the people, by human intelligence. So saving that intelligence is important. And so as far as India's role is concerned, again we are in the infancy stages. There are a lot of challenges in the initial stages when it comes to even availability of finance. So we are talking about how we can integrate that entire supply chain within India. We can have the self-reliance so that again we are having less amount of import reliance on other players. So in this, we are focusing upon OSAT facilities. We have established one of the fabrication units also. So in this case, we are focusing more upon where we have the edge initially, so that
Okay, good points.
on those foundations.
And okay, fine. We will move to the next topic, please.
Yes.
So here we're gonna speak about how Singapore has achieved astounding economic success. Astounding is the key thing over here. I been to Singapore when Indian liberalization wave in the early or the first half of the 21st century's first decade, if you speak about. That time also it was amazing. It was far more greater, but then still. So since its independence 60 years ago, beacon of prosperity, it is the richest country for many thousands of miles in any direction, obviously. 88,000 GDP per person has doubled in the real term in last 20 years. That means I'm talking about the time when I was there. It has doubled. So I can just think of it must be awesome. When it was independent in 1960s, then it was the on same lines South Africa or Jordan. But globalization, one example, balancing Singapore's domestic politics against its role as a global city. Future becomes more important because the line is blurring. People are searching for new bearings. The new order is coming up, but old order must not collapse if it is helpful. So that is why economic record is impressive and real wages have also improved 43% in real terms in comparison to even America. But the question is, when Singaporeans are sitting higher than Britain, is it the end or is it a beginning for the future? Financial center, comparison with Hong Kong, we must also create, if you talk about India, in such a way. It is having solid lead in terms of high salaries, hub of HNI, or you can say wealth creators. But in spite of this growing success in the financial sector, they are not crazy about it. They are not, you know, shouting about it. There were pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. The Monetary Authority of Singapore, it went on to speak about that how the city was not really dependent upon the capital flight from Hong Kong, but still it went on to get benefit in certain ways. Private sector holdings have increased, state-owned investments have increased. So when we speak about these assets, when we speak about sovereign wealth funds, which are sixth largest in the world, these large sums are illustrating that an economy is actually saving more than it is spending. One of the largest current account surplus countries in the world. America chooses it. Singapore also chooses America. It is not getting entangled in any of the international controversial issues. Bilateral trade surplus with America. It is not getting into any kind of, again, wrong pushways. But once it was also on the list of currency manipulation. That is why when we speak about international and national scenario in America, in Singapore, then it is the role of the Singaporean politicians and parliament. The kind of ethical standards that they have done, the kind of democratic values that they practice, the kind of political structure and competition it is showing, how the city state is being run. A lot of people of Indian origin are also there. It is not following populist tendencies much, but many argue the country is aging. The present income levels will never go much higher and it will never remain the same. That is why when we speak about the location of Singapore as an export transit zone, as I just said in the beginning, it is not a manufacturing hub also. Then the public finances will be more going towards aging population. It is very small in terms of size. Healthcare also, it is outstripping education. Government is very much clear and also advanced. Systems are being represented. Tax increases will bound to happen. Demography is changing. Fertility rate is getting down. Without immigration, Singapore's working age population will be dropped by 30% in the next 2 decades. But immigration is controversial because city's population reflects that four official languages, three official ethnic groups. Chinese are the largest. Then ethnic Malays are there, who are mainly Muslim. And then there will be more smaller groups, one can say. So Singapore's restriction on speech are the tightest when religion and racial sensitivities are very much touchy. Singapore will continue to have foreign workers, as I just said, but it is controlled. It is not swamped like UAE. In case of UAE, we know that local population is 10% of the total population or the immigrants that have been there. Another very good point is balancing the need of international companies and Singaporeans. That is also very important. It's a very delicate issue. If more number of outsider people are coming over and more migration takes place, then they will be controlling the administrative system also, which they don't want. But the most important thing, the Straits of Malacca, trillions of dollar trade which is happening. That is why it's so rich and it's so advanced. But the relations between China and US, it is also impacting in some way in Singapore because Singapore is heavily exposed to both the countries. If the trade is split between the two global blocks, like the way Russian invasion of Ukraine, then Singapore GDP and economy definitely going to get impacted. China is Singapore's largest source of imports, but it is an export also. This thing must happen with India, but then that is not happening. America is the single largest investor in Singapore. 574 billion dollars. You can think of it. In comparison to China, it is much higher. American firms are employing 2 lakh people in the country. That is 6% of workforce. And Singapore is the closest security partner, obviously, in Southeast Asia. Otherwise, Singapore claims to have a neutral diplomatic stand. It is not specializing in chip industries, but as we discuss about Taiwan, then we can link also. China is also massively expanding itself in this direction. So the question arises that in this context, when we speak about India's national security, when we speak about Eurasian security, when we speak about Indo-Pacific belt, where India stands, we have our own way. We are not too much into this tech war and China America or Sino America war. But Singapore must be having some limits, and obviously it is having. That is why if one speaks about the split between America and China, then Singapore definitely will have to pay certain cost. For example, Singapore is hosting the headquarters of TikTok. America speaks about banning TikTok in that sense. So administration is very important. What will happen if it also becomes like Britain, where stagnation comes up and the ordinary household income stop rising? Mansi, in this context, few points on India and what is the way ahead for Singapore.
The most important point which I could make out is that whether Singapore's growth is self-driven or it is driven by the external factors, like it is trade, it is finance from USA and China. Whereas when you talk about India, so we are focusing upon self-reliance and creating our own capacity. We are a diverse country. They are focused, Singaporean growth is showcasing that it is based more on finance, more on balancing it. So that can be one of the important learning areas for India when it comes to debt management or planning for debt or raising finance. So India, we can say it is better positioned in terms of sustainable and long-term stable growth.
And it is all about our vision also. Singapore, I wouldn't say indebted, but then think about Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. I had seen that there is a small place called Little India over there, and I had also seen the Asian Civilization museums in Singapore. And I'm talking about 20 years back, so you can think about the population and the GDP growth and the advancement. Now India is also comparably very much advanced and a huge superpower in that way. But then you just think about that how strategic locations help certain countries. How, in spite of very such small size, when a couple of Indian districts come together, then Singapore comes into picture. So way ahead for India is democracy, knowledge, efficient administration, and being very sure about its potential. आप कुछ कहेंगे दिव्या जी?
इधर की किस तरह से जियोपॉलिटिकल चीजें चेंज होती है, फिर कंट्री स्पेसिफिक जो ग्रोथ है उसके थ्रू सीख सकते
Okay.
हैं कि क्या क्या